my eye on above every other case, and that is Newsom versus Trump. It is Newsom challenging Trump's ability to deploy these federal troops into California. It's important because it'll not only have implications as Trump tries to deploy these troops into Chicago and New Orleans, but you and I have spoken at length about the extent to which Trump is going to try and use these troops to possibly interfere or meddle in the election if he's got these boots on the ground. That was blocked in a California district court, a federal district court by Judge Breyer. So Donald Trump lost that case, which was objectively great news. Now, an appeals court has just stepped in and temporarily lifted the limits to Trump's ability to be able to deploy these troops. So is this a step in the wrong direction? Does this mean that the appeals court suddenly is defying what the lower court said and that Trump does have the ability to deploy these troops?
No, so I don't want people to overreact to this and to panic. So oftentimes when there is a big decision that will change the status quo in a significant way. In this instance, it would change the status quo in the removal of National Guard or federal troops from the streets of LA. That judges will stay their decisions until the higher court has an opportunity to review it. Now, in this case, in fact, Judge Breyer did the responsible thing and actually put in place his own stay. So even though he ruled in favor of Gavin Newsom, and by the way, I agree with you, this is a critically important case. And so kudos to the governor for bringing this case. But the Judge Breyer already said that he was putting on hold his decision till September 12th. And the reason why is that you don't want this yo-yo situation in which, the troops are there, the troops have to go, the troops can come back, the troops have to go, right? So what Judge Breyer said was, look, I'm going to give the government, the Department of Justice, a few days, more than a week, to decide if we want to appeal and let the Court of Appeals have some time to sort of understand what the case is about and decide what they want to do. And what happened now is that the Court of Appeals, maybe frankly, as an administrative matter, without even noticing the existing stay is in place until the 12th, just put its own administrative stay. So that's what these are referred to. These are referred to as administrative stays, which means they don't comment on the merits. It's not like it's being blocked because the judges think it's a good idea or a bad idea.
It's not a preview of things to come, for example.
It is not a preview of things to come at all. In fact, oftentimes these administrative stays are put in place without the court even considering the papers. Sometimes it's done by the clerk's office, sometimes by a single judge who is just doing housekeeping. And so that's what's been put in place here. I expect early this week we will hear more from the Ninth Circuit about a schedule, about how they will consider this, and that will likely dictate what the timing is. There's an interesting parallel here, though, Brian, to how the Trump administration has handled these things. If you remember, a few weeks ago, the Trump administration sued 14 judges in Maryland, which there are only 14 judges on the federal bench in Maryland. They sued all of them. And you and I did a video, Democracy Docket covered this extensively. And the reason why they sued them was because the judges there had said they were putting in place a 2-day, 48-hour, 2-day administrative stay on any habeas petition that came in from a prisoner or a migrant, rather, who's going to be removed out of the country. They just wanted 2 days to be able to review those papers before the Trump administration could scurry these people to a foreign gulag. And how did the Trump administration respond? They sued the judges, which, by the way, is not a thing, and they lost. But it just goes to show you, Gavin Newsom is an adult. He understands that there needs to be prompt relief, but there also needs to be an orderly basis to this. You didn't see him throw a fit. You didn't see him hold a press conference in which he badmouthed a bunch of judges. You didn't see him post on social media attacking the judiciary. You didn't see any of that. But that is what we see from Donald Trump and his administration.
I was actually surprised that the Trump administration decided to appeal this because my thinking was, okay, they've already lost at the trial court. There's no legal precedent if you've lost at the trial court. And we know that Trump wants to preserve his ability to deploy these troops because he likes to feel like an autocrat, like an all-powerful being. And so he wants to deploy these troops to Chicago. He wants to deploy these troops to New York and New Orleans and any successful attempt at stopping him in another court is, of course, going to offer some legal framework to do so. But if it's an appeals court, then you have legal precedent to be able to stop him from doing so. So does it surprise you that Trump is now deciding to appeal this thing, knowing full well that if the Ninth Circuit agrees with the trial court, agrees with Judge Breyer, then not only will there be a legal framework to push back against this that the other governors can use, but there's actually legal precedent, binding legal precedent that the judges have to consider when making their decisions.
Yeah. Look, you and I talked about this at the time, and I said I thought it could go either way, and that this would be a high risk, high reward situation, right? Because for all the reasons you just said, I've kind of come to believe that there are two people who right now, and it's early, we don't even have 2026, no less 2028. But I think there are two people who right now occupy a unique place in Donald Trump's head. One of them is the governor of California. The other is the governor of Illinois. And I think each of them, for slightly different reasons, for some of the same reasons, I think caused Donald Trump to feel insecure and caused Donald Trump to feel like he can't let anything go. In other words, he feels like he has to take this on.
Right.
And so, I'm not saying that they would have necessarily acted differently if this was a different state, but it's not impossible because all the reasons you just said counseled in favor of the Department of Justice letting this one go. Number one, it could create legal precedent elsewhere. Number two, they're about to deploy, if Tom Homan, is to be believed, they're about to deploy National Guard and troops all around the country. I mean, he said on the Sunday talk shows that they were planning on deploying them in every sanctuary city. Now, I don't know how he defines that term, but it sounds like a whole lot of Democratic cities are about to be in this same position. So they've raised the stakes at a time where, frankly, that's probably not helpful to their argument in the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit now sees that this is now like a bigger thing. It might actually weaken their case. But the other thing is the Ninth Circuit is not the friendliest terrain, right? I mean, you might think that he would take his shot out of, for example, like Illinois, which goes up to a different circuit, which is actually much more conservative at the Court of Appeals level than the Ninth Circuit. Now, the Ninth Circuit's not the most liberal circuit. It used to be, but it's not anymore. But it's not the Fifth Circuit, where Texas is. It's not the Sixth Circuit or Seventh Circuit or Eighth Circuit, right? Which have really become much more sort of uniformly conservative. So, this was a strategic decision on their part. And as often as not, what I have come to observe is that the Trump White House doesn't make these decisions because they're like playing chess. It's because they're playing checkers, and Donald Trump's upset that someone just took his pieces off the board, and that in this instance might very well just be Gavin Newsom's Twitter account.
Well, look, first of all, as a quick aside, you have been absolutely clear-eyed in covering this stuff and also signaling the dangers of what may come in the future, especially as we get closer and closer to the election, and what these troops being deployed into the cities might mean if Trump tries to wield them as a cudgel against Democrats, specifically in Democratic strongholds like Milwaukee and Detroit and Philadelphia and Atlanta. So this is exactly the kind of messaging that I think folks need to pay attention to. One way to do that, the best way to support Mark's work, and a small step that we can all take, is to subscribe to his news outlet, Democracy Docket. He founded it to focus on everything voting and elections, so I'm going to put that link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. If you are looking to support any independent media, I could not recommend Democracy Docket higher. Mark, it's worth asking here, how binding would this precedent be if indeed the Ninth Circuit agrees with Judge Breyer in the trial court and it becomes legal precedent? To what extent do the other trial courts and other appeals courts have to take that into account when making their own rulings when these troop deployments inevitably get challenged in Chicago, in New York, and on and on?
Right. So it would not be binding in any place that is not in the Ninth Circuit. So it is binding in California, Oregon, Arizona, Washington. Okay. It is binding in Nevada, right? Those are in the Ninth Circuit, and it is absolutely controlling on any trial judge in those jurisdictions. It would also be controlling, although could be overturned if it came up to the Ninth Circuit to a different panel. But you should just think about it. That's one category. The second category, though, is not where it's binding, but where it is extremely influential.
Okay.
And now you're talking about trial courts everywhere in the country, right? Because trial courts, though a trial court in Chicago or a trial court in New York is not bound by the Ninth Circuit because they're not in the Ninth Circuit, in the absence of any other court of appeals authority, and this is really the first court to deal with this, they are going to look to what a court of appeals said, right? They don't have to. They could theoretically say, you know what, I think the Ninth Circuit got it wrong. But that is the exception rather than the rule. Most trial judges, if there is not a split of authority among courts of appeals, right? So first thing is they have to follow the Supreme Court. Second, they have to follow their own circuit court. In the absence of Supreme Court or circuit court authority, now they start to look and say, what do other circuits say? And if there's a split of what they say, the Ninth Circuit says one thing, the Fifth Circuit says something different, then the trial judge who's not in either of the circuits might pick their own poison. But where there's only one circuit that's ruled, you know, a trial judge is going to look at that and it's going to be highly influential on their thinking. So that's why I've said this is a big risk reward proposition for the Trump administration. And, you know, there's this saying in the law that bad facts make bad law or good facts make good law, depending on your perspective. And I find it, you know, it is not just that the Ninth Circuit could very well be favorable to Judge Breyer. It is also the case is going up on a posture that they are more likely to be favorable to Judge Breyer because there was a trial here, right? So it's not that this was going up on emergent. This didn't come up out of Judge Breyer's courtroom on an emergency motion. He made detailed findings of fact, and the Court of Appeal is going to be bound by those findings of fact, and that is like not friendly terrain for the Trump administration. But on the bad facts, the very fact that Tom Homan is saying that you're now going to see them do this in other states, at the same time that the Ninth Circuit is being asked to rule on this, boy, it puts a lot more pressure on the Ninth Circuit to affirm Judge Breyer because it doesn't feel like, well, you know, we can reverse this and just set a rule for some time out in the, you know, outside, sometime in the distant future.
There are major implications here, knowing full well that Trump is already promising to do this in states across the country.
Yeah, and if you're a Court of Appeal judge, do you really want to go out on a limb for Donald Trump, you know, as he's doing this elsewhere? And if that turns out to be a mess, it's on you that you did that. So like, I come back to where I started, which is, you know, if you had made me put money on it, I would have said initially that Donald Trump, that they do not appeal this. They let this California situation lie.
Yeah.
And then they pick the next fight in a more favorable jurisdiction on different facts. Okay. That's what I would have bet. It didn't surprise me that they did this. You know, we talked about this in our prior episode, that this was possible and but I do have to think that part of this is just how deeply Gavin Newsom has gotten under Donald Trump's skin. I mean, I think that, you know, we sometimes underestimate just how thin-skinned he is and how much he does get affected by this thing. You know, we see it on the other side where, like, you know, can you believe that Donald Trump is, you know, being sweet talked by someone from foreign leader who says he deserves the Nobel Prize, right? We tend to like see it in the other situation, but it is very possible that this is not more complicated than Donald Trump telling Pam Bondi, go ahead and fight this because I hate this guy.
Well, not to imbue him with more credit than he deserves, but is there also the possibility that he doesn't care where it goes to trial, where it goes to the appeals court, because he knows his ultimate goal is to appeal this thing all the way up to the Supreme Court? So whether it's the Ninth Circuit or the Fifth Circuit, whatever it may be, doesn't matter because he's just going to keep appealing it in front until he can get to the point where he can get it in front of his 6 conservative justices.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. But again, you know, typically the lawyers who are advising him, assuming that they have competent lawyers advising him, are saying, look, Mr. President, you want to get this to the Supreme Court, but there is a difference getting it to the Supreme Court with a win below, right? Where you are defending a win versus going to the Supreme Court where you are trying to overturn a loss.
Right. 2 losses in this case.
Which is this case, right? Like that's the risk that he runs here, is that it comes out of the Ninth Circuit with another loss, and then that's what he's left bringing there.
Yeah.
And again, and also timing matters. You know, if I'm talking to Trump, I'm like, look, we're about to launch this in a whole bunch of other states. we look like we are trying to actually provoke a response from those states, right? Like, it is pretty clear that in Illinois, Donald Trump is doing everything he can to try to provoke a response in Illinois, in Chicago.
Yeah.
And so, why are we taking this California case now as we are doing those things? As we run the risk that those things develop in a very unfavorable way that only make it harder on the Supreme Court to do what we want them to do. As opposed to, let's let those things play out, let things cool a little bit, figure out which is our best fact pattern out of the best court, and pursue that. Obviously, that's not what he's done. Obviously, he's, like I said, this is not a guy who thinks strategically about anything. But I'd be curious to know whether any of his lawyers, cautioned against this posture.
Well, we will, of course, stay on top of this. Again, all the credit in the world to you, because most of the media is ignoring the cases that are going to have major implications on the ability for Donald Trump to be able to deploy these troops. And again, not just now, but also as we get closer and closer to the election. I think we ignore this as we get closer to the 26 and 28 elections at our own peril, because this is not sneaking up on us. We already know that Donald Trump has tried to interfere with these elections. He's tried to have the voting machine seized in Georgia. He's tried to block certification of the election in Congress in 2020. And the way he's able to do that most effectively would be if he has boots on the ground. And so, again, this is a very important issue. And what happens in these cases right now will have a direct impact on whether he's able to do this as we head toward November of 26. So Mark has been covering this relentlessly. If you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe to Democracy Docket. I'm going to put that link again right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Great way to support his work, great way to support independent media and to elevate his voice, which has never been more important. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.